Okay, so we left off last week in the midst of chapter 3 of the book of Judges on page 178. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. The first 11 sentences were presented the what Israel, the land of Israel, was surrounded by Canaanites and Philistines, and then how they were enslaved to the Aramean king Kushan Rishatayim for 8 years, and just Marlene is coming in. And so they're enslaved to Kushan Rishatayim for 8 years, and then the people cried out. God sent a judge, the younger brother of Caleb, and he was able to defeat the king, and the land had rest for 40 years. All right, we'll see that will be a pattern. The land had rest for 40 years, which is how then the rabbis at least come up with a chronology for how long this period of judges lasted. So as opposed to scholars who would say that it's just a convention, in other words, just to say a long time. And it was just a poetic way of saying a long time. Don't take the number 40 literally. Okay, so before we go on then to verse 12, we didn't read from ancient Israel, so let's do that. Read the below the line commentary that he has that's on begins on page 120. Yeah, Barry?
I was just also going to say, this came up over and over and over again in the Torah class that, I know there's a discrepancy. It's biblical history. It's not real history. It's not documented. But I just find it so interesting, even now, after the 5 books of the Torah, that these later books are also describing in pretty much detail, the foibles, the follies, the missteps of the Jewish people, that it's just over and over again, their failings. And it's interesting to write a history of your people and just constantly remind everyone of the mistakes. I mean, I understand that reminding the mistakes becomes a warning, but it's also written in perpetuity, and therefore that becomes the story. And I just find that interesting, and I find it interesting that even now, in the later books, it's still there.
So again, my perspective on this is that it's, even though these books, Joshua, Judges, the 2 books of Samuel, 2 books of Kings, are written as if they are history books, they are not pure history. Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a history until, I don't know, who's the famous historian of Roman history?
Josephus, but even he is questioned.
No. I mean, not the Jewish one, not Josephus. There's what, Herodotus was a historian. So so-called modern history, the academic field of history, sets the stage and sets the rules for how history becomes an academic scholarly subject. But so history before modern times always was written from a particular perspective, so that from the vantage point of the victor. So then the victor then will pick and choose what they're going to write about and how they're going to write it. Okay, so those histories are not written in the way that we imagine history to be written, but this history that's in the Bible is written from a religious perspective. So the reason why Israel's failings are written here, which is unusual for a people to write a history and to maintain that history in the Bible, is from the religious perspective, is if and that is that we failed in our commitment to God and the covenant. Okay, so yes, there are events that are described as if they are happening in history. We haven't been able to, archaeologists haven't been able to find evidence of this until you get to King David's time, really. There could be some evidence from other things that I'm not fully aware of, but we know for sure. So here's the fascinating thing. If you subscribe to the New York Times digitally, there was a lengthy, really good article that's, I think, going to be published in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday, of a staff writer and a panel discussion that she has with 6 scholars, Palestinian and Israeli, about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in one of the footnotes, because it's referred to as Israel, the Jewish people have an attachment to the land of Israel since ancient times. In the footnote, she says archaeologists can date it back to 1200 BCE. Okay, so I date for sure King David's at 1000 BCE, and for sure we have evidence of that. The 200 years before that, okay. So yes. So anyway, I wrote in the Israel update that just went out, and that I sent by the email, and I thought I had changed the date to 2/2/24, but it says 1/29/24. It is what I sent you today. What I sent out today is a link to that article. And what I wrote about that article is that it's clear Palestinian historians, Israeli historians write history with a particular bias. And there is so they choose from all the facts that are laid out before them. So you have archival material, and this article is from 1920, the beginning of the British Mandate, until today. Okay, and mainly it's 1920 to 1948 with the United Nations partition plan and the establishment of the State of Israel. Okay, so it's really a great summary, despite its faults. That is, the fault being that it comes clear in the give and take between the Palestinian and Israeli historians that it's hard for them to admit the fact that the other side is focusing on. Okay, so Palestinians bring up, that just the Nakba, and how the Jewish state was a European exercise and implant into the native Palestinian society and culture. And the Israeli historians are trying to give a different perspective there, and it's unclear how much they're listening to each other even today. And you think historians would be neutral because they're dealing with the same material. So you don't need to have a bias. You don't need to have a particular perspective. Like, in other words, it's more like there are Nazi historians, okay, so like in the time of Nazis, 1933 to 1945, you got German Nazi history and science being perpetrated, and then everybody else. So then it's pretty clear why Nazis would promote their particular perspective. You'd think this is not the same thing, and that Palestinian Israelis, it might work better in terms of the future relationship to make it all to repair the rift and have peace going forward, that you'd think that historians, it would be helpful if historians could write the same thing so that the narrative becomes the same narrative. And that's a huge problem with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today. So despite all of that, it's still this, instead of reading books and books and books that have been written about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this one article, if you had one thing that you want to share to somebody, here's a brief history. And this article actually is not so brief. It takes a lot of time to get through it, but it's really good. So this it's a good thing to share with people if you want to share what the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is. But that all of that is based on what your question is, Barry. Why are the Israelites' failings promoted in the Bible when it's history, and history should promote the victory and everything we've done well? Well, the point is, it's not regular history. It's religious history, and therefore it's pointing out our failings.
Yeah, just to be clear, I wasn't asking that question. I was just noting that
Yes.
it's interesting. And I also read the New York Times piece and it's great, but in all of my conversations with people since October 7th, it almost seems like you have to put it on a TikTok video for anybody to really
Right.
have the attention span
Oh,
to
that's right.
delve into anything deep.
I agree, and you can't do it on a TikTok video. You can't do it justice. You can't. It's just impossible. It's easier for the Palestinians to do it, and this is not to denigrate them, but their narrative is easier to put in a TikTok video. We're the underdog. We've been the people that have been persecuted. We're fighting for our freedom. Whereas Israelis, it's a little bit more complicated. It's a bit more complicated. You can't do complicated on TikTok. You just can't. And the tragedy of our society today is that with social media, that people just have no patience. People have no patience to read anymore. They just don't. And even this, I mean, because I'm interested in it, I read the whole thing and I read the footnotes. So who reads footnotes? So, and again, I also posted on Monday in my Israel update about Justice Barak's 10-page opinion to the International Court of Justice. Who's going to read that? And it's only 10 pages, but everybody should read that. It just it almost brought me to tears as I was teaching the Jews in the News on Monday about it. Just incredible that the justice Aharon Barak, representing Israel on the panel of justices, is sharing his story of genocide and his survival of genocide through the Kaunas, Lithuania, and the ghetto, and hiding in a closet in a farm with his mother for 7 months until being liberated by the Russians. All right, just to have that included for the record permanently in the United Nations International Court of Justice is incredible and very moving to me. So anyway, but who's going to read it? Who's going to read it? We're preaching to the choir, because the choir will read it, but the people who need to read it won't. So the fact that the New York Times did this, and with all the faults in the New York Times, faults from my perspective again, because I prefer to be moderate in my political leaning, and New York Times, the only op-ed person I like to read is Bret Stephens, sometimes Tom Friedman, sometimes. So, but that's just me. So the New York Times is much better than a Washington Post. But still, the fact that they did this and had the Israeli historian's perspective You know, there's also that. So you got the Palestinian perspective, the Israeli historian's perspective, and then you have the editor's perspective, right? Because the editor, this panel discussion could have gone, could have actually been quite different, but we only know from how it was edited. So the editor decides to choose what from the panel discussion to put in the printed article. So there's that too. Anyway, I'm sorry, we're going far afield of reading the book of Judges, but all I could say is that it's a 3,000-year-old issue talking about the history of the people, of any people, because it comes with bias. Okay, and again, the bias in the Bible is about the relationship of the Israelites with God and how rare the people were, how rare it was for a time when the people actually were following in God's ways. Okay, so let's look on page 120 in Ancient Israel to read altar on the first 11 sentences of chapter 3 that we read last time. Okay, all who knew not the wars of Canaan. The translation mirrors the looseness of the Hebrew syntax, though this clause clearly modifies Israel. To teach them warfare which before they did not know. Here, an entirely different reason for the incompleteness of the conquest is introduced. Israel had to learn the skills of war in gradual stages through conflict with the Canaanites before it was prepared to conquer them. But we were also told that they had to learn war because it's a test from God. To the wars between Israel and its neighbors and the Canaanites and the other nations is because there would be less war if they followed in God's ways and more war if they did not follow in God's ways. Okay, so it's not just to prepare them. We were also read before that it's a religious test. Right, verse 4, to test Israel to know whether they would heed the command of the Lord. Now the writer reverts to the theological explanation for the incompleteness of the conquest put forth in chapter 2, verses 21 to 23. Right, okay. 7, on page 121, the Asherot, in the plural feminine form, a different Canaanite goddess is evoked, not Ashtoret, but Asherah, the consort of the sky god El. Kushan Rishatayim, king of Aram Naharaim. There are two oddities in this name and title. Rishatayim, which means double evil, sounds more like a symbolic epithet than an actual name. Aram Naharaim is Mesopotamian Aram. There were Arameans closer to the eastern border of Israel, which would be a long distance from which to exert temporary dominance over any population west of the Jordan. All right, so he's just providing the scholarly take on this. How accurate is this description, and who is this person? Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's young brother. He has already figured in the narrative both in this book and in Joshua as the conqueror of Hebron. In that instance, however, his military prowess was not enabled by the descent of the Spirit upon him according to the pattern of the judges. His appearance now as the first judge is no doubt intended to establish a bridge between the period of Joshua and the period of the judges. All the elements of the judge paradigm are evident. Israel's defection, its subjugation, its crying out, God's response in raising up a rescuer, the descent of the Spirit, the ensuing victory. But only the outline of the pattern appears. No details are offered of Othniel's exploits. Okay, so that's all he has, because next comment is verse 15, and we haven't read that yet. Okay, so let's get back to the text. We're on 178, the last line. And let's read, let's see how far we get. The chapter is 31 sentences long, so we'll see how far we get. Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael la'asot hara b'einei Adonai, Vayechazek Adonai et Eglon melech Moav al Yisrael, al ki asu et hara be'enei Adonai. Okay, so now first it was Kushan Rishatayim of Aram, sent by God, right? So that's the other perspective that the Bible presents. History would never say it that way. That there's no, because you can't prove that God sent the Babylonians to destroy the land of Israel. Well, we have archaeological evidence that the Babylonians did destroy the first temple in Jerusalem, but there's no archaeological evidence that God came down and said that the Babylonians were God's tool to destroy Israel and the temple as a punishment for neglecting God. Okay, that's a perspective on why it happened. So again, why did Kushan Rishatayim come from Aram? The Bible's perspective is because the people neglected God's ways. Why now is Moab, Eglon, the king of Moab, coming? Because the people neglected God's ways. So the people of Israel additionally, or again, did bad in the eyes of God, and God strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel. So that's how I would translate this. Yes, and that's how the translation says it too. Because why did God strengthen Moab against Israel? Because they did bad in the eyes of God. 13, Vayesof elav et bnei Ammon va'Amalek vayelech vayach et Yisrael vayirshu et ir hatemarim. So he added on to Eglon. Eglon added on the people of Ammon and Amalek. And he went and struck Israel, and they possessed the city of palms. So we'll see what that is, what the city of palms is. 14. Vayavdu b'nei Yisrael et Eglon melech Moav shmona esrei shana. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. All right, so it was an 8-year servitude to Kushan Rishatayim. Now it's 18 years to Eglon, king of Moab. Vayiz'aku b'nei Yisrael el Adonai, vayakem Adonai lahem Moshiach, et Ehud ben Gera ben Hayemini, ish iter yad yamino, vayishlechu b'nei Yisrael biyado mincha le'Eglon melech Moab. Okay, this is I'm reading it in the Hebrew, I'm understanding what it's saying, and I'm reminded of this. This is a famous story for those who have read the Bible before. Okay, so the people of Israel cried out to God. God raised up for them a savior, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite. But also, it's important, he's called a Yemini. But Yemini, Mordechai in the book of Esther is called Ish Yemini. But it's understood that he's a Benjaminite. But Yamin is also right. So Ben HaYemini could be the son of the right-handed man. But it's not translated that way, because the very next phrase is Ish iter yad yemino, so which is just translated as a left-handed man. Okay, so iter yad yemino. Let's see if Alter translates that. Just 1 second here. All it says is a left-handed man. The literal, okay, so he says the literal sense of the Hebrew idiom is a man impaired in his right hand. Okay, yes, he's impaired in his right hand because people are supposed to be right-handed, and he turns out to be left-handed. So there are many cultures around the world who would tie up the left hand if they see that their child is preferring the left hand and make them right-handed. And that could have been what the case here, but he fought it and became a left-handed man. But it becomes important in the story, right? Right, Barry.
I wonder, I mean, having read this story, I just wonder if is this like the first example of left being kind of
Yeah.
considered sinister? I mean, is this is such an old story?
So he's not, no, you'll see. He's not considered sinister, but yes, in other cultures, left-handed is being sinister because you're different. You're acting in a different way. And what does that mean? Yeah, but no, it's just the way that Alter said it in his commentary. It's just that he was impaired in his right hand. So, but again, so then he had no choice but to be left-handed. So maybe he was born with a birth defect with his right hand, and they had no choice but to be left-handed. I don't know. Okay, but the point.
But the right hand is always favored, even up to today.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, right hand. Yeah, right. Less so, but yes, it's assumed that right when Jacob was presented with his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph puts the older one under Jacob's right hand for it so that he would get the preferred blessing. Blessing comes from the right hand. Okay, or when a king sets out the table, the preferred place is to be at the right hand of the king or the queen, right? So, but Jacob crosses his hands, and yes, the blessing comes from the right hand, but he puts the right hand on the child that he wants to bless. Okay, so we know that from Genesis already. Okay, so the right hand is preferred, and when we put on tefillin, we put the tefillin on our left hand because we're right-handed people. If you're left-handed, you have to do a little bit of correction to your tefillin, and you'd have to go on YouTube to see how to do this. If you buy tefillin are by default made for right-handed people to tie on to put the arm strap. There's a box with the leather with a little knot of leather next to it, and you're wrapping it around your left hand. So that knot is there in a particular place if you're right-handed, putting it on your left arm. But if you are left-handed and put it on your right arm, then the knot is in the wrong place, and you have to retie it to make sure the knot is in the right place. So you can go on YouTube to see how to do that if you're left-handed. But yeah, so you have an alternative if you're left-handed to put it on your right arm. But tefillin, by default, are made for right-handed people. Okay, and also a yod, by the way, and Marlene knows this as a lefty. The right hand, and I know she's a lefty because I've been a gabbai for her. Right, how you hold the Torah, right? The tradition assumes that you're reading Torah right-handed. Okay, so the yod is made in a way that it's a hand, but it's a right hand pointing, right? So it's a right hand index finger. So I don't know if they make left-handed yods. I don't know, Marlene, if
I
you
have to look into it. I haven't looked into it yet.
but
I've thought about it a lot.
yeah, so the problem is you're reading with your left hand, and then so as a righty myself, and I read Torah a lot, you hold the yod in your right hand, and you're also with your left hand holding on to one part of the Torah. The Torah has two wood bars that are called an eight. So you would do it that way. I'll just mute it. Yeah, just muting you more. So, but as a lefty, so you hold the yod in your left hand as you're reading. Again, this is hard because you're reading from right to left, right? If you're right-handed reading right to left, it's easier. But so that's hard to do it like across your body as you're reading the Hebrew and moving the yod. And then you want to hold on to the right-handed side of the Torah, but the person who has the Aliyah is supposed to hold on to that part of the Torah while the Torah is being read. So it's complicated and logistically complicated for a lefty to read Torah, all right, because the tradition has it that you're right-handed. So yeah, it just anyway, there are workarounds, but it's hard. But the whole point here is this guy, Ehud, is left-handed, and it's important for the for the coming story. So Ehud, by the way, is a common name in Israel today. Lots of names of these judges become names that are used in modern in Israel today. So like Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel. All right, named for this guy. Okay, so he's left-handed, and so the people of Israel were sent through Ehud a gift to Eglon, the king of Moab. Okay, so they're subservient for 18 years. Ehud comes along because the people cry out. So Ehud is an emissary of the people, and he also has God's spirit resting on him, to Eglon. 16. Vayas lo Ehud cherev, v'la shnei feyot gomed orka, vayachgor ota mitachat lemadav al yerech yamino. Okay, this is the point of the story. So they made for Ehud. Ehud made him a sword that had two edges. Okay, a two-edged sword. So I don't know how swords are made, but certainly when you use a sword, you're going to swipe. Use it to swipe. So that swiping action, at least that edge, had to be really sharp to make it work. Did the other edge of the sword need to be? I don't know. It depends on how it's made and how you put it back into the halter. Anyway, so was it common for swords to be two-edged? I don't know. This is a two-edged sword of a cubit in length, so it's 1.5 feet long. And he put it under his garment on his right thigh. Okay, so I read mystery novels and detective novels. That's what I do on Shabbat most of the time because it's mindless to me, helps me relax. Okay, what I learned, what the series I just finished is Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch, Detective Harry Bosch series. Okay, in that series, it takes place in Los Angeles. Doesn't matter. In that series, he describes, every one of these books describes how the detective, Harry Bosch, has his gun holstered and where it's holstered. Because he's right-handed, the holster goes on the left. You go across your body, take the gun out, and you're ready to shoot. You wouldn't put it on your right side. I don't know why. Don't know why. I haven't been trained in the use of a gun, and I hope never to have to be trained in the use of a gun, but apparently that's what you do. You go to the opposite side to take it out. That kind of motion is a more fluid motion and a quick motion. So the idea that the sword was put on his right thigh, as a left-handed person, it makes sense. It's on the other side of his body to be there to pull out. When your opponent, if there's an opponent in a duel, the opponent expects you to be right-handed. So the fact that he's left-handed is going to be a surprise to Eglon. We will see what happens here. Okay, so the placement of the sword on his right thigh is because he's left-handed. 17. Vayakrev et hamincha leEglon melech Moav veEglon ish bari meod. Now, so he approached. He offered the present to Eglon, the king of Moab, and Eglon. It in the Hebrew, if I translate it based on modern Hebrew, he's a very healthy man, but it's translated as a very fat man. Okay, so I guess what we're picturing is, I don't know, what's that from Star Wars? It's not Yoda, but there's some big fat
Jabba the Hutt.
Jabba the Hutt. That's it. Picture Jabba the Hutt. Okay, if you're into Star Wars, let me just see what yeah. So Alter translates it as very fat man. Okay, the name Eglon. So Alter says the name Eglon strongly suggests Egil, meaning calf. In this satiric view of the enemy, he is a gross, fatted calf ready for slaughter. All right. So was his name Eglon, or as a result that the legend grows from the result from this story, and then they made up a name for him to based on the result of the story. Okay, so I don't know, the legends about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. Was it really a cherry tree? But maybe a cherry tree was significant in the early days of American history, and they just made it a cherry tree. Okay, whatever. Or the Potomac River, throwing the silver dollar across the Potomac River, which you're at Mount Vernon. It's an impossible task, right? He might have thrown it across the stream, but they made it into the Potomac River to highlight George Washington. So again, was his name Eglon? Have no idea. Eglon could be a Hebrew name, but Moabite is the Moabite language similar to the Hebrew language? I don't know enough. I'm not sure if Moabite language, it is a language, there is a language. Is it Semitic in origin? I don't know. Okay, so Eglon is a very fat man. 18. Vayehi kasher kila lahakriv et hamincha vayeshalach et ha'am nosei hamincha. So when he made an end of offering the gift, he, I guess Eglon, sent away the people who bore the gift. 19, Vahushav min ha-pesilim asher et ha-gilgal vayomer devar seter li elecha hamelech vayomer has vayetzu me'alav kol ha'omdim alav. So he himself turned back from the quarries that were by Gilgal, and he said, I have a secret to share to you, O king. And he said, silence. And they left from before him all those who were standing nearby. 20, Ve'ehud ba'elav, vehu yoshev, ba'aliyat hamekera, asher lo levado, Vayomer Ehud devar Elohim li elecha vayakam me'al hakisei. Ehud approached him, and he was sitting in the cool upper chamber that he had by himself. And Ehud said, I have a message from God to give to you. And he rose from off of his throne. 21, what's the message? Vayishlach Ehud et yad simolo, vayikach et hacherev me'al yerech yamino, vayitka'eh bevitno. So Ehud took his left hand he thrust his left hand, and he took the sword from off of his right thigh, and he impaled it in his stomach, or thrust it into his stomach. 22, Vayavo gam hanitzav achar halahav vayisgor hachelev ba'ad halahav ki lo shalaf hacherev mi bitno vayetze haparshedona. All right, so there are words here that I don't know, so I have to read the English. And the haft also went in after the blade, and the fat closed upon the blade, for he drew not the sword out of his belly, and it came out behind. I just want to see how Alter translates this verse.
You know,
yes.
he I know he was a bad king, but it was still somewhat of a sinister attack. That's why I was
Yes.
asking about the left thing. The translation here says a secret errand. It doesn't say an errand from God.
Right. So it's no, a message from God unto thee. And Ehud said, I have a message from God unto thee. Where's the secret? Secret.
19.
19. Right. He's right. He himself turned back from the quarries. I have a secret errand unto thee, O king. Right. In 19, it's just secret. In 20, it becomes I have a message for you from God. Okay. Now the Parshed Donah is the word here, and it came out behind. So from what the English translation here in our text is saying, the sword itself went all the way through. So the belly swallowed up the entire sword, including the haft, and then it came out from behind. The Alter says, no, the hilt too went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not withdraw the sword from his belly, and the filth came out. The filth came out. So in other words, yeah, either, I don't know, it's disgusting. Sometimes, I don't know, you read about people killing other people, the intestines come out. Maybe that's the filth. Or went all the way through to make the filth come out from behind. Okay, pretty graphic, whatever it is. The sword went all the way through. 23. Vayetze Ehud hamisderona vayiskor daltota aliyah ba'ado v'na'al. Then Ehud, so he assassinates the king, and he's by himself when he assassinates the king, because the king himself had sent everybody out. So Ehud then went forth unto the porch, and he shut the doors of the upper chamber and locked them. All right, so give himself a chance to run away before anybody would understand what happened. So he'd give himself a head start. 24, Vahu yatsa va'avadav ba'u va'yir'u vehine daltot ha'aliyah ne'ulot vayomru ach mesich et raglav b'chadar ha-mekera. So he left, and his servants came, that is Eglon's servants came, and they saw that the doors of the upper chamber were locked. And they said, surely he is covering his feet in the cabinet of the cool chamber. He is covering his feet. Could be a euphemism for doing private business, taking care of, right, answering the call of nature. That's why the door's locked. 25, Vayachilu ad bosh, vehine, enenu poteach daltot ha'aliyah, vayikhu et ha'mafteach, vayiftachu, vehine adonehem nofel artsa mate. So they began to become ashamed, like, king's taken a long time to answer the call of nature. What do we do? And they said, let's open the door of the upper chamber. So they took a key, and they opened, and voila, their master falls dead before them on the ground. The Ehud nimlat ad hit mamam v'hu avar et apesilim vayimalet hasi'irata. So Ehud, in the meantime, escaped while they were lingering, ashamed, not knowing whether to go into the chamber or not. And he had already made it beyond the quarries and escaped to Seir, or Seira. Vayehi bivo'o, vayitka bashofar bahar Ephraim, vayerdu imo b'nei Yisrael minahar v'hu lifneihem. So when he came, so it came to pass when he came back to Israel, they blew a shofar in Mount Ephraim. Now we have to picture this. Moab is in the south, right? Like below the Dead Sea, while next to the Dead Sea and below, right? And so now blowing in Mount Ephraim, that's quite the distance to go from. Essentially, you have to go across the Jordan. However, he got back to Israel, he's coming from the south heading north. So Mount Ephraim is in the north. So the shofar is blown in Mount Ephraim, and the people of Israel came down with him from the hill country, and he went before them. 28, Vayomer Alehem, Ridfu Acharai, Ki natan Adonai et oivechem et Moav beyedchem, Vayerdu Acharav, Vayilkedu et Ma berot hayarden leMoav, Velo natnu ish la'avor. So he said, come with me, chase after me, but in a way that, in a military way, come behind me so we can attack, because God has given your enemy, the Moabites, into your hands. So they came down after him, and they were able to take, they took the fords of the Jordan. So all the crossings of the Jordan, right, all the bridges that were there, they were able to capture all those bridges that across the Jordan that led into Moab, and they did not let anybody pass. 29, Vayaku et Moab ba'et hahi ka'aseret alafim ish, kol shamein v'kol ish chayil, velo nimlat ish. So they smote the Moabites at that time like 10,000 people, and they're translating this kol shamein. In modern Hebrew, shamein is fat. The word for the fat king before was bari. Here it's shamein, so here it's translated as lusty. All the lusty men and all the soldiers, nobody escaped. 30, Vatikana Moav bayomahu tachat yad Yisrael vatishkot haaretz shmonim shana. So the Moabites were subdued on that day under the hand of Israel, and the land was quiet for 80 years. All right, so it was 40 years before, and now it's quiet for 80 years. 31, Va'acharav haya Shamgar ben Anat, vayach et plishtim, shesh ma'od ish, be'malmad habakar, vayosha gamhu et Yisrael. And as a parenthetical note, after him, after Ehud, was Shamgar, the son of Anat, and he smote the Philistines, 600 people, at Malmad, with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. So this is a parenthetical note, and I don't know if there's more about Shamgar coming up in chapter 4, but that's the story of King Eglon being assassinated by the left-handed Ehud. Okay, let's see, it's 10:21. Let's see how far we get with the commentary on this. All right, so the commentary begins on 179 in our text. 179, 12 to 30, Ehud. Strengthened. The meaning is enabled him to prevail. It was not Eglon's prowess, but Israel's sinfulness that led God to raise up this new foe as an instrument of punishment. Eglon, as the name of a man, it occurs only in this chapter. As the name of a place, it appears in Joshua 10 and 12 and 15. All right, so we know it. So the commentary is pointing out it's not a person's name in the Bible, but it is a place name. Moav, the territory east of the Dead Sea, extending eastward to the desert, southwest to Edom, northwest to Ammon, and north to Reuben and Gad. Okay, so It's possible then I was wrong. I thought Moab was from the Dead Sea and south, but it's also north. So then it might not been a far distance for Ehud to go after assassinating him to get to the hill country of Israel. Okay. The river Arnon was the northern boundary. Only one literary record has come down to us from this ancient land, namely the so-called Moabite stone discovered in 1868. That whole Moabite stone story gets to, there's a book written by Hillel Tigay about the book of Deuteronomy. I don't remember the name of the book, but if you Google Tigay, that's the last name, first name Hillel, book about Deuteronomy, it's a nonfiction account of what happened to the book of Deuteronomy, and is it found in Moab, and this Moab stone appears there too. So if you wanted to learn more about the Moab stone, that's one place to look at it. Hillel Tigay, Book of Deuteronomy. He gathered, that is, he formed an alliance. Children of Ammon, neighbors and close kinsmen of the Moabites, they appear again as allies against King Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20, chapter 20. Amalek, a Bedouin people roaming the Sinaitic Peninsula, whose name Israel always recalled with loathing as that of the first enemy to attack when he left Egypt. Although practically exterminated by Saul, they appear again in 1 Chronicles in conflict with Israel, and in the days of Esther, Haman the Agagite, traditionally a descendant of the Amalekites, plotted to destroy the Jews in Persia. And they did not loot the city only to abandon it, but on the contrary, they dwelt in it to show possession. City of palm trees, namely Jericho. Okay, so that's where he went, to the city of palm trees. The difficulty of reconciling the occupation of the city by Eglon with its destruction by Joshua can hardly be overcome by assuming that the Moabites built a fortress on the ruins, because the statement they possessed implies that it had been wrested from the people previously in occupation. That the Israelites had rebuilt it is impossible, because Joshua had pronounced a curse on the one who would rebuild it, or even rebuild another city with the same name. It is therefore likely that the city of palm trees was a settlement which was built adjacent to Jericho and called by a different name to distinguish it from the old Jericho. So this is a medieval commentary, Malbim, explaining how the city of palm trees couldn't be Jericho because of this curse associated with it, so it must be a village set up near it. 180 now, but when or then, literally and. Ehud, as the name of a clan, it appears in 1 Chronicles. Gerah, the name of a son of Benjamin, see Genesis 46. Benjaminite, Israel's savior on this occasion, hailed from the tribe whose land had been invaded. Left-handed, the Septuagint, right, the Greek translation, and Vulgate, the Latin translation, translate ambidextrous. Rashi explains the Hebrew iter as hand contracted by disease or mishap. According to Kimchi, another medieval commentator, it signifies simply the loss of the natural use of the right arm. The defect is mentioned because it figured in the sequel. A present. This was doubtless the periodic tribute imposed by the Moabites. The term mincha is used of the meal offering to God. Generally, it denotes a gift brought as a token of subservience or goodwill. A sword, not a dagger, a span in length, as the old translators thought, but a long dirk. Okay, just technical name. A cubit, the distance from the elbow to the end of the thumb. The text has, instead of the common word for cubit, amah, which measures from the elbow to the end of the middle finger, the noun gomed, which does not occur elsewhere in the Bible. Okay. His raiment, it was a wide flowing garment in which the weapon could easily be concealed. His right thigh, to avoid rousing suspicion when about to draw the weapon with his left hand. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. The clause is introduced as a parenthesis in anticipation of what is narrated in verse 22. He sent away. It's evident from the next verse that Ehud accompanied them part of the way and then returned to Eglon's palace alone. He did not wish to be encumbered by his followers in his subsequent flight because it would be easier for one man to escape than for several. The people that bore the present, a large retinue, was required to carry the tribute, which was payment in kind. But he, the Hebrew construction, makes use of the nominal sentence instead. Well, okay, grammatical, doesn't matter. The quarries, Hebrew noun is pisilim, to which the Septuagint and Vulgate, again the Greek and Latin, give the usual meaning graven images. Perhaps they were rude stone images marking an ancient shrine or Moabite idols placed as boundary stones by Eglon. Right, trying to understand why it's translated as quarries when the Hebrew word is the word for idol. Da'at Sofrim conjectures that this was the quarry from which graven images were hewn. Gilgal, this is Tel Etele, southeast of ancient Jericho. Accordingly, Ehud crossed the Jordan, both going and returning. Others explain that Pisilim was the ford of the Jordan near Gilgal. He escorted his men as far as the Jordan, but did not cross. And said, he spoke from a distance, as is shown from the following verse. A secret errand, he therefore could not convey it to Eglon in the presence of the retinue who carried the present, but had to return alone. Some such excuse was essential to cover up his leaving and returning. Keep silence. This is addressed by Eglon to his attendants and indicates his desire not only for silence, but for complete privacy. And Ehud came unto him, that is, Ehud drew closer, like one who is going to whisper a secret into someone's ear. He was sitting. It's not clear whether the king retired to his room for the purpose of holding a private conversation. Probably had been there all the time. The present tense supports this conjecture. Cool upper chamber, literally upper chamber of cooling. The aliyah was a one-roomed apartment built in a corner of the flat roof of the house. It was fitted on all sides with latticed windows which shut out the sun and gave both free ventilation and privacy. In the heat of the summer, it was the coolest part of the house. The aliyah is often mentioned in the Bible as part of the private residence, serving as a guest room, or of a palace. At times it was very spacious. A message from God, we're on 182. The text has Elohim, a term which could apply to any deity. The view of the rabbis is opposed to that of some modern commentators, who explain that Eglon's mark of respect arose from his belief that the message came from his own god, Chemosh. On the contrary, they maintain that he knew from whom the Hebrew emissary brought his message and deliberately stood up as a mark of respect. As a reward for this action, God gave him a daughter, Ruth, who became the ancestress of a long line of Hebrew kings. All right, incredible midrash then to say, why is the king getting up for this lowly person, Ehud? He might be getting up out of respect for God and the fact of our God, and the fact that he did that, had to be rewarded in some way. Even though he's assassinated in a very gruesome way, they made Ruth to be his daughter. So the incredible irony of the whole thing, then, if Ruth is Eglon's daughter, then Ruth also becomes King David's great-grandmother. So the arch enemy of Israel, the king of Moab, is King David's great-great-grandfather. Whoa. But for the Midrash, okay, it's all part of God's plan. So fascinating stuff. It's 10:31. Let's stop here. We'll continue with this commentary next time, and we'll look at altar also as we finish up chapter 3. So,
Do you know what the sequel is? Are you familiar with
I
the
think
story?
it means. I think in this context, it means what follows.
Yeah.
So
I mean, are you familiar with that part? Do you know
no,
that
this
story?
is what. Now, what I mean is that the commentaries seem to suggest there's going to be another story that's a sequel. I think in older definition means what follows.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's this story. That's following. Okay. All right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom.